13 from the Swamp, Passaic River Lore by Wheeler Antabanez. Full audiobook as read by the author. For the paperback, visit luckycigarette.com. One. Swamp Winter. Passaic River banks in winter, where fluctuating water levels form impromptu ice sculptures, so complex, fragile, and temporary that even the slight wake from the nightshade makes the ice shiver and sometimes shatter as my gloved hands clutch the paddle, passing it back and forth from gunwale to gunwale, dipping silently into polluted water, propelling the canoe steadily upstream in a fine flurry of snow. Smell of January on the cold breeze, accented by wood smoke, billowing from cozy fireplaces on the Livingston Florham Park border. Strange pipes are here, where the suburbs meet the swamps. Colossal cement tubes with manhole covers, jutting from the river, poking vertically out of the Passaic. Reminiscent of the book It, half expecting Pennywise to show his clown face or see a red balloon rising from the rim. I paddle a little faster past the pipes. Stephen King monsters don't seem far-fetched out here in the frozen swamp. There could be creatures lurking anywhere, just under the crust. Last year, the river was obstructed by fallen trees, but is now clear, all the way to the power lines, where I pull the nightshade up an icy embankment and promptly slip on my face. Slight taste of blood oozes from lower lip, but nah, I'm okay. I stow the canoe and start walking, trudging from hummock to frozen hummock toward looming high-tension wires, an off-limit zone where towers zap electricity and steadily hum as they march through the swamp. I follow a gravel utility road leading to an abandoned farmhouse, overgrown with vines, windows boarded up, doors open to the elements, spooky, sagging, secluded, and now I'm inside, crunching around on broken glass, making sure no one is home before creaking up rickety stairs to check out the second floor, where bedrooms are ransacked and mildewed wallpaper peels, smelling strongly of urine. Another staircase leads to the farmhouse attic. I put my boot on the first step and hear a shuffling sound from above. No way to tell who or what might be up there. Curiosity almost getting the better of me, but not quite. Too dark, too scary. So I creep back downstairs into the rifled kitchen, penciled growth charts on blistered wooden molding, smashed cabinets, copper pipes ripped out, everything crooked and sagging. Too many phantoms in this farmhouse, so I step outside and head over to the barn, where there are horse stalls piled with forsaken belongings, mattresses, furniture, clothes, thrown away in haste. I snap a few photos, but it's getting late. Winter sun low in the sky, cold penetrating my shell. I start walking back toward the canoe, but stop at the power lines to examine a decommissioned pump house, one of several in this area. Forgotten relics on the riverbanks that look like boarded-up mausoleums, concrete and forbidding, protected by a perimeter of prickers, yet eerily attractive. So I wade through thorn bushes, walk through the unhinged doorway, and step into a concrete chamber, where a steep staircase leads to pits, filled with dark water of unknown depth, even more Pennywise-esque than the standpipes. And I feel not alone, like something is watching, from water wells that should be frozen, but somehow aren't. A chill goes up my back. The cold is creeping again. Time to fetch the canoe and get home. Back outside, I shuffle carefully along Passaic River banks, on brittle sheets of ice, breaking through repeatedly but launching with relatively dry boots. The paddle dips and drips. The nightshade flows, along with small icebergs on the downstream current. Body temp pleasantly rising. Meditative motion. I look up from a mild trance and spot a red mink, crouching on a fallen log. Reaching for my camera, she vanishes, leaving only a mental image of sleek red velvet disappearing into dead winter brush, fluid and ghost-like, thriving in the frozen swamp, where others would starve. And come to think of it, I'm pretty hungry myself, so I dig in with the paddle, past haunted standpipes and gunmetal ice, back to the truck, where I crank the heat, load the canoe, and head home for dinner. Two, River of Death. Cruising with my wife in the speedboat on the Passaic River one fine summer morning in 2012, approaching Diamond Shamrock in Newark, New Jersey, where the EPA is dredging to remove dioxin-contaminated mud behind 80 Lister Avenue, once the site of a notorious chemical factory that was dismantled in the year 2000 by men in spacesuits who packed 932 shipping containers with toxic rubble and entombed them in place beneath a monumental Superfund cap. The diamond plant originally manufactured DDT and other dangerous pesticides, but in the 1950s and 60s, its primary output was Agent Orange, a military code name for the cancer-causing herbicide deployed during the Vietnam War as a weaponized defoliant during a campaign called Operation Ranch Hand. From 1962 to 1971, the United States of America sprayed Agent Orange from airplanes and helicopters across the jungle canopy of Vietnam to kill the leaves and expose the movements of the Viet Cong. We also targeted the crops and water supply of the Vietnamese people, resulting in famine, ecological disaster, and a mass poisoning that affected millions of lives, including those of our own soldiers. But unknown to most Americans at the time, another war crime was being perpetrated at home. Agent Orange is highly toxic, but doesn't pack the same concentrated carcinogenic punch as its unwanted byproduct, 2,3,7,8 tetrachlorodibenzoparadioxin, the most dangerous of all dioxins, that was extracted from each batch of Agent Orange and dumped in its pure form directly into the Passaic River for 18 years, resulting in the severe contamination of the tidal Passaic, the Hackensack River, Newark Bay, the Kilvan Cull, the Arthur Kill, and beyond. Along the flood wall of the Diamond Cap is what's called a hot spot, the sizzling epicenter of the pollution. As we approach in the speedboat, half the width of the river is blocked by barges, tugboats, cranes, and a temporary pile-driven containment wall. Giant corrugated pieces of interlocking steel that form a box around the dredge area to prevent plumes of dioxin sediment from spreading any further while they dig. We've been watching these guys all summer, so we know that usually the crane would be busy at this time of day, dumping bucket after bucket of toxic mud into a listing barge. But for some reason, the dredging is stopped. No black smoke belching from the stack. No workers on the decks. I cut the speed to reduce our wake, and just then we spot a man, standing on the crane barge, wearing a suit, leaning over the railing. He's looking at something, and my wife and I correctly surmise at exactly the same time that the workers must have found a dead body. More suits appear as we get closer, and the prosecutor's mobile command unit comes into view, parked on the Superfund cap. Then we see the state police boat under the point-no-point bridge, coming up the mouth of the river to assist with the scene. I put my boat in neutral and drift slowly downriver past the barges, snapping photos and taking video as the detectives board the dredger's workboat and loop a rope around the floater, towing it slowly to shore, where they examine the corpse, zip it into a body bag, and load it into the coroner's truck. After the body is removed, the investigators disperse, and there isn't much left to see, so I turn us around, dock for the night, and hurry home, to whip up a quick multimedia package, which I offer to the Star-Ledger as an exclusive for tomorrow's paper. At first they seemed interested in possibly using the images for a web gallery and video, but after an internal discussion, they ultimately decided to pass. The next day, a small blurb with 3 lines of text appeared on NJ.com, featuring only a thumbnail map of Newark instead of a picture. I felt a little sad for the unnamed dead man, whose passing generated so few waves, but I know it's not the Star-Ledger's fault. That's just the way life goes in the Ironbound. Floaters are so common on this river of death, they're barely even newsworthy. I can only guess what was said during the editorial meeting, but I can almost see the editors reviewing the images as they shrug their shoulders and figure, just another corpse in the Passaic, no big deal. Happens all the time. Three, Voodoo River. One summer afternoon at the Nutley boat ramp, a splash of unusual color in the underbrush caught my eye. Upon closer inspection, I discovered 2 aluminum oven trays, turkey-sized pans, placed haphazardly on the riverbank and filled to the brim with weird stuff. Cap guns, mousetraps, lollipops, burnt cigars, roses, mangoes, whistles, couscous, toy cars, glasses of rum, overflowing, rancid, baking in the summer heat. I knew right away this was authentic witchcraft, a spell cast on the banks of the river. Brujos, mambos, sorcerers, and high priests lurk along the Passaic. Poke your head under bridges, peer into storm drains, tread where only drug people wander. You will find evidence of the occult in every form and variety, from Satanism to Santeria. On another occasion, I was about to cross the river from Newark to Kearney on the abandoned railroad bridge known locally as The Cut, when I happened upon a calabash bowl, 50 feet above the Passaic, containing a decapitated rooster, burnt photographs, half-smoked cigars, and something resembling a squashed tomato that may or may not have been a disembodied animal heart. The sacrifice rested on a veritable altar of used hypodermic needles. Meanwhile, upstream, on the Clifton-Garfield border, below the Dundee Dam, 2 fishermen spot an unusual bag floating down the Passaic River. They wade out and grab it, only to discover the tiny cadaver of a 2-year-old girl, shrouded in plastic, still wearing a hospice wristband. Turns out she was grave-napped from 50 miles away in Stamford, Connecticut. Dead for 2 years, but remarkably preserved. Set adrift on the Passaic River for mysterious reasons that have yet to be fully explained. This occult crime bears the mark of Las Reglas de Congo, also known as Palo Mayombe, a religion that includes corpses, skulls, and human bones in their ritual spells. Investigators posed a theory that the little girl was exhumed for her personal dynamism, stolen by spellcasting ghouls because she defied the odds and lived longer than expected. No one was ever caught for this crime, so we may never know the exact motive, but stuff like this goes on all the time. Back in Newark, police raid the house of a Palo priest for stealing bones from Mount Pleasant Cemetery. Cops find skeletons in his home, along with a cauldron of skulls in the basement, and are able to link the remains to desecrated grave sites. The priest receives a 5-year sentence, but he's out by now. Ritual sacrifices happen nightly in North Jersey. We paved the marsh and walled the river, but the human swamps of our sprawling cities still teem with mystery. Whenever I wander the shoreline or explore in the boat, I always keep a lookout for magic along the Passaic.
There's all sorts of stuff. You got your burnt cigars, you got your rum, mango, grapes, pennies, guns, mousetrap, all sorts of good stuff.
4. Our first paddle. Back in 2005, I had the overwhelming urge to own a boat. I kept seeing wetlands out my car window that I yearned to explore. So I bought an old fiberglass canoe, painted her flat black, and christened her Nightshade. My daughter is all grown up now, but on the day of our first voyage, she was 7. I lashed the Nightshade to the roof of the car, belted Star into her booster seat, and drove up Route 287 to the White Bridge launch for a test paddle through the Great Swamp. After setting our gear on the bank, I adjusted Star's life preserver, got her comfortable in the bow, and shoved us out onto the glittering Passaic River. The canoe handling wonderfully, carrying us along a watery path of lily pads, cattails, jumping fish, and great blue heron. At some point, Star asked, "Are we still in New Jersey?" And it was a valid question. This healthy forest doesn't resemble the chaotic suburbs where we normally dwell. The Great Swamp is vibrant and alive as the river meanders through grasslands, shady woods, and fields of wildflowers. To discover the shallow headwaters of the Passaic River is to find peace, and this tranquility drew us back on many future expeditions to the White Bridge launch. Even as the river occasionally shifted course, we were present to watch the changes and evolve into the adults we became. But I can still see us paddling on that first day. Star as a 7-year-old kid, me as a 28-year-old dad, growing up together on the Passaic, sharing treasured adventures that will never fade, no matter where the river takes us. Five, Sharkey's Dump, Part 1, Getting There. The P.O. Costa Industrial Complex in Fairfield, New Jersey is a good place to launch the Nightshade when I want to take the long way to the capped mounds of Sharkey's Dump. I have a 2-stroke outboard that basically transforms the canoe into a moped for the water. The engine is only 1.5 horsepower, but does the job as I pass under the Pine Brook Bridge and head upstream on the Passaic River. It's so much fun to cruise around back here, motoring through the forest, where trees lean over the river from both banks, their branches touching overhead, arching into a green canopy that forms a tunnel through the swamp. There are many tributaries in this area, joining forces with the Passaic. I know I'm getting close to the Rockaway River when the water beneath the canoe starts to whirl and spin. Along the left shore, the current is murky brown, while water on the right bank pours crystal clear from the Rockaway into the rich chocolate milk of the Passaic. Both rivers blend midstream, creating swirling vortexes of coffee creamer tornadoes that break off into psychedelic fractals and spin past the boat. I swing the bow of the canoe starboard, taking the right fork, straight up the mouth of the Rockaway, where I ease back on the gas and go a little slower on this small tributary, with its slalom course of snags, fallen trees, and submerged boulders, somehow managing to make it past these obstacles without breaking the shear pin on the propeller. I emerge from the thick forest and find the confluence of the Whippany and Rockaway rivers, which is also the location of a sewage treatment plant, where the toilets of over 50,000 people from Parsippany, Troy Hills are flushed into one central location, which explains the excrement I've been smelling for the past half-mile or so. This evil odor is relatively new and was unknown to the natives, back when this was a Lenape paradise and the rivers had pure Algonquin names, before the fecal pipes, power lines, toxic waste, and carbon-belching highways invaded the wetlands, before the army of plastic bottles assembled their ranks in the swamps. The indigenous people named these watercourses Passaic, Rockaway, Whippinong, and the rivers were clean, but no more. The swamp is now deeply toxic. In addition to the pollution, The canoeing gets a little sketchy here as well. I wanted to get further up the Rockaway, but the river is narrow for a spell, creating a strong current that impedes my progress. I hop out and drag the nightshade through thick underbrush to an eddy above the swift water, where I relaunch the canoe, put fresh gas in the outboard, and get her cranking again, to glide through plumes of duckweed, heading upstream on the Rockaway toward the capped mounds of Sharkey's Dump. Part 2. UFO Sighting. Back in the 1930s, there was an enormous pig farm on the swampy land where the Rockaway and Whippany rivers converge. Somewhere around 1945, the pig farm transitioned into a disposal area known as Sharkey's Landfill, or in local vernacular, Sharkey's Dump. Trucks tipped trash here for 27 years, forming islands of garbage that choked the Rockaway River. By the early 1970s, the landfill was sprawling out of control and had to be shut down, which led to the discovery of illegally dumped toxic waste on a truly apocalyptic scale. By the time the EPA got involved, Sharkey's was a chemical death zone. Toluene, benzene, chloroform, acetone, cyanide, mercury, cadmium, lead, xylene, pyrene, methyl naphthalene were detected by the ton in the groundwater and soil. To combat the spread of this pollution, the government built 2 massive caps that cover the main fill sites. One of these caps is a 26-acre island located right smack dab in the middle of the Rockaway River. The toxins under the cap were not removed, they were entombed, beneath a pile of engineered stone that rises from the water like a multi-layered scab. And this is my destination today, so I continue up the Rockaway, stash the canoe on the far side of the island, scramble up the steep slope, and sit for a while on the summit, catching my breath. And while I'm perched up here on the capstone, I think back to another time, many summers ago, when I snuck onto this property with a girlfriend for an evening at Sharkey's Dump. And we sat on these same rocks, watching the sunset, until just after nightfall, when we spotted the first UFO. At first we thought it was an airplane with a single red light, flying fast and low over Troy Meadows. It looked like the craft was coming right towards us. We even braced for it, expecting to feel a whoosh over our heads, but it suddenly changed course without slowing or banking, pinballing off to the south at high speeds. We didn't have long to wait before an identical aircraft came into view, following the same flight path. Easily tracked by its unblinking red light, it reached the invisible point in the sky and abruptly changed direction, in an eerie display of airmanship that blatantly defied the laws of physics. By the time the third UFO appeared, we were on our feet, staring at the red light in amazement, watching the ship come in, just like the first 2, low and fast, making absolutely zero noise. It came to the prearranged point in the sky and shot off due south, racing toward the horizon in a blur of speed. After the third aircraft was gone from view, the show was over for the night. But reflecting back on that evening, from this sunny landfill afternoon, our close encounter doesn't seem far-fetched, because now I know, from my travels on the Passaic River, that there are strange things in the swamp, hidden from society by a shallow stream of water, mysterious oddities waiting to be discovered by anyone with a canoe and an intrepid spirit. The land here is tainted, the water is poisoned, and the air smells like shit, but if you want to witness some UFOs, Sharkey's Dump is a damn fine place to visit. Six, Dundee Damned. Pretend you're a fish. Let's say a 12-foot sturgeon, sleek like a shark, armored like a dinosaur. You're swimming around in the Atlantic Ocean, gobbling up crustaceans, small fish, and mollusks. The year is 1823. You're living a good life, enjoying the abundance of the Atlantic, when all of a sudden you feel an incredible urge to return to the stream of your birth. This intense restlessness means it's time to spawn. So you swim past Sandy Hook, through Raritan Bay, up the Arthur Kill, past Staten Island. You travel the entire length of Newark Bay and up the mouth of the Passaic River. You swim for another 25 miles through brackish waters until you reach the base of the Great Falls in Paterson, New Jersey, where you find all your friends and relatives gathered for the spring spawn, revved up and ready to party. This is the place of your birth, a lush paradise below the Great Falls, containing the perfect combination of factors that will allow you to successfully reproduce. Sounds great, doesn't it? Like a veritable Garden of Eden. But unfortunately for your offspring, they happen to be born in the year 1823, which means by the time they mature and feel their own urge to reproduce, it will be too late. Because the spawning party ends in 1833 when humans erect the Dundee Dam between Garfield and Clifton, New Jersey, condemning any sturgeon born after that time to never return, severing the essential life cycle by completely blocking the river and effectively ending upstream migration. This crime against nature might have been justified if the dam served some essential purpose, but get this. The dam was built to divert water into a man-made waterway called the Dundee Canal. The Dundee Canal was built so boat traffic could continue past the dam, which is an insane example of circular logic that begs the question, why build a dam in the first place if all you want to do is go around it? The canal was ill-conceived, wasteful from the start, and didn't end well. Upon completion, the 1.8-mile Dundee Canal was used only one time by one single barge before it was deemed obsolete, unnecessary, and classified as a complete financial failure. It was such a bad piece of business that it drove the Dundee Manufacturing Company to bankruptcy and collapse. But even though the canal was a flop and the dam caused the extermination of several species, a diverted Passaic River happened to be useful for generating hydroelectric power, so the Dundee Dam stayed and still stands to this day, despite the fact that it's structurally unsound and doesn't even provide hydropower anymore. The massive stone wall stretches across the Passaic, preventing access to ancient spawning grounds where mammoth sturgeon like yourself once frolicked by the hundreds of thousands, where herring laid eggs by the millions, where infinite numbers of shad found collective climax after their long journey from the sea. But this paradise is lost. The dam disrupted ancient breeding rituals, destroyed countless generations of fish, and permanently transformed the upstream river into a fetid pond known as Dundee Lake, a stretch of the Passaic that stews and bubbles in a murky brown miasma of toxic mud, choked by sewage pipes, stagnant water, and the foul corruption of factories that once harnessed the current, but are now obsolete and mostly dead, their skeletal remains left vacant on muddy banks, burnt, crumbling, abandoned, former titans of pollution, purposeless now, except to provide makeshift shelter for migrant workers, prostitutes, and drug addicts, who call these abandoned factories home. Congratulations, folks. The marsh is paved. We did it. The swamp has been filled. All native species are crushed or suppressed. Concrete blooms in our Jersey jungles, and that's the way we like it, because this is what we call progress. The scabby crust of humanity hardening across the landscape. The lust in our hearts dooming us to grow and grow and grow until we are so overpopulated that we crush our habitat beneath the stamp of our civilization. And somehow we're always surprised when the water rises. We're shocked when the river backs up behind our dams, flows into our streets, and enters our homes. Sometimes years will go by without a flood, and we forget about the Passaic. We keep tearing down trees and building up wetlands with our relentless development, thinking we're so clever until the skies open up, the waters surge, and the cleanup bill rises into the multi-billions. The swamps were once a vast basin, a squishy sponge eager to soak up water. When the floods came, the river crested harmlessly into wet woods where natives paddled between trees and dug out canoes. Now the sponge is paved over. Instead of grasslands and forest, we have flat plains, incapable of soaking up water. Modern rain is collected on broad surfaces like roofs, parking lots, and roads, funneled swiftly into gutters, storm drains, and small tributaries that pour into the Passaic and cause her waters to rise fast and deadly, bursting violently over walled banks, swelling behind man-made dams into vast lakes that flood river towns with brown effluent water, rich in heavy metals, synthetic toxins, and vile Homo sapien waste, a dark portent of a very bleak future for the swamp, for the wildlife, and for humanity. Look at your surroundings, people. It's already too late. New Jersey will surely sink itself, along with the rest of the planet, and there will be no safe place left in the whole wide world for a 12-foot sturgeon like you anymore. Seven. Annie's Road. If you're from North Jersey, there's a very good chance that you're already familiar with Annie's Road. I cruise this stretch on a regular basis to get from Patterson to Little Falls, where the two-lane blacktop twists and turns through Totowa, along a steeply wooded hill that overlooks the Passaic River. Maps list this thoroughfare as Riverview Drive, but locals mostly call it Annie's Road, a term I never properly understood until I read about Annie in the pages of Weird New Jersey magazine. Like most urban legends, there are many variations to the myth. The earliest fables I've heard about Annie date back to the 1700s and take place during colonial times. These tales usually describe Annie as a young bride-to-be walking with her family down Riverview Drive toward a shady glen by the river, where her groom is eagerly waiting. It's the happiest day of Annie's life, but just as her fiancé comes within sight, a runaway horse carriage whips around a bend, slams into Annie from behind, and drags her beneath the rear axle for several hundred yards, until her body is flung clear and her corpse lands with a thud at the feet of her horrified fiancé. A more contemporary version of the Annie's Road legend takes place in the 1960s. This time, Annie is cast as an angry prom queen who gets into an argument with her date, storms out of the dance, and decides to walk home. As she is plodding along in high heels on the narrow shoulder of Riverview Drive, a truck comes around the bend, clips Annie, and hooks her beneath the back bumper. The driver doesn't realize what happened, so he keeps going, causing her head to drag against the pavement, leaving a line of blood and brains that stretch for almost a mile. Another component to the prom story deals with Annie's father, who supposedly shows up each year on the anniversary of Annie's death with a bucket of red paint that he splashes along the road and guardrails as a reminder of Annie's brutal demise. Legend says that he still comes back, even though he has been dead for many years, to repeat this paint splatter ritual. No one knows if this anecdote is true, but every year around prom time, fresh red paint really does show up, splashed along Riverview Drive, which keeps the ghost stories current and inevitably attracts curious tourists, who all behave differently depending on what version of the legend they happen to hear. There seem to be endless variations circulating around at any given time. Annie's story is just as popular at the local bar as it is in the neighborhood schools. Everyone around here knows about Annie's Road, and each time the story is told, it changes a little bit. The details depend on who is spinning the yarn. Most narrators are somewhat merciful in the telling, sticking with the vehicular dragging theme, which is a relatively quick death. But sometimes Annie dies in more sadistic ways. One particularly sinister variant of the prom story has Annie leaving the dance on foot, only to be abducted by a van full of necrophiles, who beat Annie to death, rape her lifeless body, and toss her defiled corpse over the guardrail, where it slides down the muddy bank and into the Passaic River. Only a sicko would go there with the story, but no matter which scenario you hear, it will always conclude with Annie as a ghost, haunting Riverview Drive in a long white dress, appearing suddenly in front of cars, forcing drivers to swerve into the trees and die themselves along Annie's Road. Legend says she is often seen on nights of the full moon, if a driver turns their headlights off, plays some old-timey music on the radio, and creeps along very slowly, Annie will supposedly appear in the rearview mirror. It's this part of the story that fetches the tourists, who distractedly drive at night without lights on tight bends, trying to navigate twists and turns while looking in the mirror for ghosts. Obviously, this is very dangerous, and unfortunately for local residents, Annie isn't the only attraction on Riverview Drive. Midgetville is another illicit draw. Situated right on the bend of Annie's Road that locals call Dead Man's Curve, there's a small hamlet of diminutive houses that has achieved unwarranted fame as a supposed community of little people, which is entirely untrue and ridiculous. The homes were originally small summer cottages built during an era when people actually vacationed along the Passaic River. Now the cabins are full-time residences where perfectly normal-sized people dwell. Unfounded rumors about midgets, a horribly offensive term by the way, are nothing but urban legend, pure kid stuff and nonsense. The fact that only average-sized people live there is well documented, but even if there were little people living in Midgetville, why would anyone think it's okay to harass them? Here's the usual scenario. People come to Annie's Road hoping to see a ghost. When Annie inevitably fails to appear, Midgetville serves as a supplemental adventure, usually leading to interactions with the locals, which rarely go well. Though the residents of Midgetville are not dwarfs, they are extremely angry, and for good reason, because they have been terrorized, hassled, and assaulted by loud, obnoxious sightseers, showing up drunk outside their houses at night, honking horns, throwing eggs, screaming for the midgets to show themselves. In one such incident, a kid got into an altercation with a resident and ended up shooting him in the head with a frozen paintball, cracking the poor guy's skull and almost killing him, for absolutely no good reason at all. After this senseless assault, the police got more serious about patrolling, hung a bunch of warning signs, and created a roadblock at one end of the neighborhood. But the preventative measures haven't stopped the ghost hunters, joyriders, curiosity seekers, and packs of nocturnal teenagers who seek out the backwaters of North Jersey in search of midgets, dwarfs, and the restless woman in white of Annie's Road. Eight, blazing through the swamp. For 2 seasons I cruised the lower Passaic in the Sevis Natus, my 17-foot fiberglass speedboat, painted flat black with skull and crossbones and a 70-horsepower outboard. The expedition was of a literary nature, to write a book called Wheeler on the Passaic. Headquarters was Rapp's Boatyard, the last working marina on the Passaic River, located on the muddy banks of Kearny, New Jersey, where I rented a boat slip from 2012 to 2013. Hurricane Sandy hit New Jersey hard in the fall of 2012, almost wiped the boatyard off the map. The 9-foot storm surge decimated Rapp's, sloshing 5 feet of storm water into the machine shop, completely wrecking the yard, picking up boats from storage, shifting them off their blocks, and in some cases carrying them away downriver. The Sevis Natus was safe in Montclair during the storm, but the boatyard was so completely decimated that the prospect of a 2013 boating season looked grim. It took a lot of hard work to get Rapp's even semi-usable. I cleared a path to the docks, cleaned up the shop as best I could, and repaired the stairs so Mr. Rapp could get inside. Conditions were less than ideal, but Mr. Rapp agreed to let me keep my slip, and we persisted for one final boating season amongst the wreckage. Spring, summer, fall, the Sevis Natus patrolled the lower Passaic River, Newark Bay, and the lower Hack, while I wrote it all down in my journal, eventually filling 6 composition notebooks with adventure stories from the Passaic River. Docking a boat on this heavily polluted waterway with its temperamental tides and harsh urban vibe would put serious pressure on any vessel, but was especially tough on my 1973 Glastron and her 1985 70-horsepower Evinrude. One hot summer day, shortly after casting off from Rapp's, the outboard overheated a mile downstream. I killed the engine as steam billowed from the stern and tied up to the pilings of the NX bridge, where I waited about an hour for the motor to cool, eventually limping back to the dock at Raps, with the boat at the slowest speed possible so as not to boil the engine again. Clearly the outboard needed a new water pump, and for that I was going to need help. My buddy Frank is an auto mechanic by trade and a Passaic River adventurer by nature. He helped me to find the right boat for this odyssey, and when she breaks down, he always gets her running again. Frank and I pulled the boat out at the Kearney ramp and towed her back to Frank's service in Fairfield, where his friend Tommy stopped by to assist with the repair job. Tommy is a professional mechanic and happens to own a 70-horsepower Evinrude as well, on which he performed an impeller replacement just last year. Tommy's expertise was extremely welcome, and there wasn't much for me to do, so I stayed out of the way and recorded everything with my camera. Here's how the job looks on fast forward. Tommy removes the propeller. Frank heats the lower unit bolts with a torch. Tommy removes the hot bolts with a hand ratchet. Together they wrestle with the gear case, eventually getting it disconnected. Tommy carries the lower unit into Frank's garage and stands it upright by the skeg in a large vise. Frank zips the bolts off the water pump unit. Tommy removes the housing. Together they examine the pump, confirming that the impeller is indeed cracked. Frank removes the old gaskets, cleans the flat surfaces with a file. Tommy greases the replacement parts. Together they install the new impeller, tighten all the bolts, and while they're at it, they decide to change the gear oil in the lower unit. After everything is lubed and connected, they slip the lower unit back in place. Frank greases the threads of the bolts. Tommy hand tightens them in place. After the propeller is reinstalled, the job is complete. So we hook up the outboard to the hose and start her in the driveway. After a bit of fiddling around, Tommy and Frank have her purring, but we decide to run her under full load before sending her back to Kearney. So Frank hitches the trailer to his Jeep, and we take a ride to the Passaic River in Fairfield for a test run through the Great Peace Meadows, where the river is narrow and serpentine and can be dangerous for a fast boat with its sharp turns, submerged rocks, and sunken logs. Frank owns a particularly quick jet boat that takes hairpin turns at 40 miles per hour and will snap your head back on a straightaway. He takes this run all the time, so it was natural for him to man the helm for this test drive through the swamp as we slid the Sevis Natas off the trailer and proceeded upstream into the Great Peace. Once past the houses, Frank jammed on the gas, the motor responding immediately, eager to go fast, running perfectly, a nice jet of water pissing out the back, letting us know the impeller was doing its job, pumping river water through the outboard, expelling the heat. As we came to the first sharp turn, going about 30 miles per hour, the Sevis Natas sent up a huge wake that rose over the bank of the river and crashed into the woods like a tsunami. We were frighteningly close to the shoreline, and Frank looked at me like, glad we made it. He is accustomed to driving the jet boat, which is more maneuverable at high speeds than the deep-hulled Glastron, but it only took that one close call for Frank to adapt, and from that moment it was on. He kept the throttle up as far as it would go, and we sped through the Great Peace, zigging and zagging past obstructions, whipping around tight bends, dodging tree branches and rocks, blasting through the swamp. The river here twists and turns so much that a boat travels 12 miles to go 4 as the crow flies. We made it deep into the bog very quickly until a fallen tree that blocked the entire river halted our forward progress. This was as far as we were going to get, so we idled around for a while Tommy made adjustments to the outboard, tuning it by sound like a musical instrument, until he found the perfect pitch and she purred like a kitten. Now it was my turn to drive. I jumped excitedly to the wheel, and instantly we were up, speeding full throttle with the downstream current, a huge wave of joy fanning out behind me, the forest a green blur in my peripheral vision, rocketing through the Great Peace, down the winding tunnel of trees, on a lightning ride of mind-blowing turns, fabulous near misses, and absolute freedom at the wheel of my very own boat. Like all amazing experiences, it was over too fast. As we approached the boat ramp, I slowed us down through the no-wake zone, and we pulled the Sevis Natas onto the trailer. I thanked Frank and Tommy for fixing my outboard, and we discussed our mission for the next day, to relaunch the Sevis Natas at the Kearney ramp, so I can patrol the lower river once more and tell the tale of Wheeler on the Passaic.
Parents?
9. Home from New York City. I took a job with the amazing Kreskin, an 84-year-old stage mentalist, as his road manager, getting him to shows and appearances, setting up his performances, taking photos and video, updating his web presence. The position only lasted 6 months, but it was an extremely weird experience that I wouldn't trade. We flew into Canada during an Arctic blast, attended a wild horror con in Atlantic City, and drove through Alligator Alley in the Everglades, where Kreskin performed his mentalisms to sold-out audiences on both Florida coasts. We went to many strange places, but most of the travel was back and forth from New York City. Kreskin's home base is in North Jersey, so depending on traffic, it's usually a hop, skip, and a jump to the Playboy Club, the Friars Club, the Fox News Studios, or Manhattan lunch with book publishers. The day I'm thinking of, we were down in the East Village, attending a wake for Vinnie Vella, an actor friend of Kreskin's, best known for his role in The Sopranos and Casino. We paid our respects to Vinnie's family, grabbed a bite to eat, and headed back to the parking garage. I can still picture it. Late winter on the Lower East Side, setting sun, icy wind howling so hard between skyscrapers that Kreskin almost blew away in the gale. Back in the car, we cruised through the Holland Tunnel, but encountered major traffic in Jersey City. It's the usual clotting of vehicles, disorganized lines of honking commuters, extremely tired and cranky, violently impatient to get home from work, backing up all the way to suburbia, which is where we're going as well, so I can take Kreskin to his house and be free for the night. Can't wait to get back to my own home, shed this funeral garb, and relax with my wife on the couch. But traffic is crawling. The 12 miles home are going to take hours. Kreskin and I chat for a while about horror movies and our mutual appreciation for vampires, but it isn't long before he starts to drift and is soon asleep, lolling in the passenger seat, head nodding on chest, stage makeup staining the collar of his shirt, dreaming weird mentalist dreams that I don't care to speculate upon, as I continue to stop and go, gas brake, onto Route 1 and 9, checking out all the awesome graffiti on buildings and walls, Kid PK reigning high over New Jersey, causing me to briefly smile. But as we creep along, I begin to catch the frenetic energy of so many trapped drivers, yearning to slam on the accelerator, but stuck. Then we crest the hill on Newark Avenue, where a panorama of infrastructure suddenly looms. Massive bridges standing erect against the sunset, silhouettes of steel and concrete contrasted across the sun-stained sky. Red, pink, orange, yellow, purple, blue, clouds seemingly on fire, whipping in the roaring wind. And downriver I see them, the 5 massive stacks of the abandoned Kearney generating station, and the skeletal dinosaur bones of the Pulaski Skyway, a deck truss cantilever masterpiece with webworks of steel sprouting from statuesque concrete, delineating between river and sky. All this beauty hits me in one quick glance, but I have plenty of time to gaze as we inch forward toward the Hackensack River, that gorgeous sister to the Passaic, with her numerous crossings all in one spot. The Path Lift Bridge, the Hack Lift Bridge, the Hack Freight Rail Bridge, the Whitpen Bridge, and the new Whitpen Bridge Replacement Project. Monuments to transportation, crammed together in one strategic location, soaring above the salt marsh. My mind wanders through the monotonous traffic down to water level, where I've been in boats. It's easy for me to imagine the swirling brown tide coming in under the crossings, pushing water upriver like a pump with all the weight of the moon behind it. Unstoppable forces that can't be tamed. I know the turbulent current firsthand, immensely powerful, polluted, and deadly. But from up here on the Whitpen bridge deck, my view out the windshield is limited, mostly consisting of concrete, asphalt, and steel, except for quick Meadowlands glimpses of waving phragmites, their delicate, fluffy seed heads blowing in the frozen salt wind, suggesting amber waves of grain, but apparently bad for the environment, invasive and harmful to the marsh, much like the bridges that prop up this maze of highways and spew carbon across our petroleum paradise, where the traffic keeps crawling and crawling and crawling. But once past the Whitpen crossing, we start to move a little, and I manage to keep up a good pace under Route 280, Kreskin still nodding off, chin on chest, head rolling with the turns. The roadway is clear until we reach Harrison, where as usual there is a massive backup of taillights, and I creep along for almost 25 minutes to go a quarter mile onto the Stickle Bridge, so we can cross the Passaic River from Hudson County into Essex. And in the quiet interior of the car, with the winter wind still whipping outside, I let my mind drift back to summer, when I used to let the boat idle with the current and float underneath the Stickle, to stare up at the ceaseless traffic and listen to the thundering of cars and trucks, their undercarriages briefly exposed through steel mesh as they sped across the lift portion of the bridge. But winter is too strong for me to sustain my summer's revelry, and after waiting in line for what seems like forever, it's finally our turn to drive onto the metal grating, and now it's Kreskin's car that's momentarily on display. Just another one of the many thousands of vehicles that will flash their chassis as they cross the bridge tonight. And once we're on the Newark side of the Stickle, the highway mercifully opens up, so I gun the engine into the fast lane, and it isn't long before we're back at Kreskin's house. He wakes up as we turn into the driveway. I grab the mail, help him get situated inside, and before he can find something else for me to do, I'm back in my own rickety old pickup truck, speeding home to Montclair, all the while musing in my head about the sights and sounds of the winter marsh and the enchanted industrial swamps of northern New Jersey. Flood lakes. West Essex Park along the Passaic, motor silent and tilted up, paddling the canoe through overflowing woods. 3 feet of water in the forest today. Spring snowmelt and severe rainstorms inundating the swamp. Canopy dripping from recent showers. Soft highway roar growing louder as the nightshade pops from the tree line onto the flooded plain of Hatfield Swamp. Usually a field of cattails and grass, now a sheet of rippling water. So I tilt the motor into the lake, gas her up, pull the cord, and cruise, parallel with Route 280, where floodwater is threatening to brim over the highway asphalt, but hasn't yet. So the cars keep rolling while I zoom along, almost at their level, crossing the temporary lake to a bridge over the Whippinong that allows me to pass under the highway onto the flooded fields of Troy Meadows. Vast stretches of grass, now covered with crystal clear water, swaying beneath the propeller as I cut through reflections on the surface of overcast skies and bald eagles circling, ready to defend their nest in the crook of an ancient tree that normally stands on the bank of the Whippany River, but is now an island in the flood. 2 fledgling chicks stick their skinny heads above the rim of the car-sized nest, screaming for fish. Father eagle lands, tosses them a pickerel, and swivels an evil eye towards the nightshade. I know he doesn't like the look of me, so I kill the motor, light up a joint, and float quietly, keeping a respectful distance from the birds of prey and the highway traffic too, absorbing the majesty, solitude, and pollution of North Jersey's floodwater lakes. "11. Sign spree. When people see me go by in the boat, they often yell from the shoreline, 'Hey, what river is this?' It's amazing how many people don't know the name of the stream running through their own backyard. So I decided to make a bunch of signs and hang them along the Passaic. The first step was to make a spray paint stencil. It said Passaic River in bold caps and had an arrow pointing straight down to where the river would be. I made 100 8x10 signs out of scavenged plywood and sprayed the stencil onto each one. Once the signs were mostly dry, I threw a ladder on the rack of my pickup and set out on a mission. Armed with a cordless drill, a full box of screws, and 100 Passaic River placards, I was well prepared for some serious sign-hanging fun. My first target was the Bridge Street Bridge on the Harrison side of the river, where I stood on a cement wall in broad daylight, reaching up on tippy toes to screw a Passaic River sign to a telephone pole, while people at the traffic light watched but didn't interfere. That day I covered a lot of territory, hanging about 60 signs around Newark, Harrison, Kearney, Lyndhurst, Belleville, Nutley, Clifton. All the arrows on the signs pointed directly toward the Passaic, and I felt pretty good about the results. The next day I started in Patterson, hanging the first sign of the day behind Libby's Lunch, and then hopping the fence at the top of the Great Falls, where I attached a sign to a tree 75 feet above the river, on the edge of the chasm. This was a sketchy spot, but well worth the risk, because the Great Falls became a national park, and for some crazy reason, the park rangers let the sign stay. Maybe they didn't want to climb out there and get it, but whatever the rationale, it's still hanging to this day. And I like to go there sometimes to visit. But a lot of the other signs have been taken down by now, especially the ones in easy-to-reach places. I can't tell you how many people have emailed me saying they stole a Passaic River sign only to find out that it was me who put it there. This sign-hanging spree might have gone on indefinitely, but on the third day I got caught. I was out with a fresh batch of 25 additional signs, making good progress, filling the gap between Patterson and Lyndhurst, hanging signs in Garfield, Fairlawn, Elmwood Park. By the time I got to Rutherford, I only had a few signs left. I was busy hanging the last of them, perched on a ladder in Van Winkle Park, when I heard the blurp blurp of a police car as a cop sped onto the pedestrian path and aggressively rolled up behind me. My first instinct was to bolt, but my days of running from the police are over. So instead, I climbed down the ladder, set the drill on the ground, and smiled at the cop. You can only imagine the young officer's confusion as I began to explain why I was wearing paint-splattered coveralls and hanging Passaic River signs just for fun on a workday. He kept trying to figure out my angle, investigating how I might be profiting from this activity. I explained that I'm a frequent boater, that I love the Passaic River, and that I'm seeking to enhance public awareness. He sort of got it, but wasn't sure what to do next. So he radioed headquarters, asking if he should arrest me. He was given instructions to wait. As soon as Commander rolled up, a much older cop with a salt and pepper mustache who calmly assessed my motives as I justified the validity of my sign-hanging spree and backed up my story with a copy of the Weird New Jersey special issue Nightshade on the Passaic. He eventually saw I was telling the truth, but made me take the sign down, and then sent me on my way with a warning not to hang any more signs in Rutherford, which I agreed to and so far haven't violated. Out of all the signs I hung in the wild, that one was up for the shortest time. Perhaps the best placed signs were the ones my buddy Frank and I put up later from his speedboat, the Jersey Tomato. We waited for a very high moon tide and launched at the Snake Hill boat ramp on the Hackensack River. After cruising through Newark Bay, we came up the mouth of the Passaic and hung signs for 15 miles from Kearney Point to Wallington, motoring slowly up to bulkheads, bridges, and creosote poles, where I would stand on the bow of the boat and attach the signs as high as possible, so when the tide receded, they would be well above the average water level. These covert missions are about as close as I get to having good, clean fun, and I think I feel another sign spree coming on, so if you're walking along the river or driving in your car, make sure to keep your eyes peeled. You might catch a glimpse of Wheeler as I balance on a ladder with a screw gun in one hand and a handmade sign in the other, trying not to break my neck while crudely attempting to spread the word about our most important local resource, the Passaic River. "12. Halloween on the Passaic. Wood smoke, salt air, autumn leaves, navigating upstream in the Sevis Natus, keeping the boat at half speed through the unmarked channel of the Second River Shoal, between low-tide rocks that could rip out the hull if not traversed with precision. Laughter floats on the breeze from early trick-or-treaters, making their rounds through Kearney, beneath an afternoon moon shining full circle in the blue sky, where tonight witches will soar on broomsticks to celebrate Samhain and All Hallows Eve. But now I'm the one flying, past the mouth of the shoal, full speed ahead, up the Belleville Reach, leaving a trail of echoes under the Rutgers Street Bridge, and a big wake that soon catches up with me when I slow down to investigate an orange blob afloat in the drift. Somebody's perfectly good pumpkin, going out with the tide. I stop and scoop it up, whip out my knife, and carve a quick jack-o'-lantern right then and there for the docks, to serve as a beacon for river spirits, night haunts, and creatures of the deep. "13. The Passaic River will triumph. We may think of the Passaic River as a poisoned, sewage-smeared death zone, a place to throw corpses, dump garbage, and dispose of toxic chemicals. We may think of her as our personal toilet, a sluiceway for all those icky bad things expelled from our disgusting bodies, a place where we can flush our daily shame and never think twice. But there will come a time when we will be confronted by the fact that everything on earth is connected, and our waste comes back to us in the water we drink, the air we breathe, and the food we eat. We have been losing a war we didn't even know we were waging, against the river, the planet, and ourselves. But take heart, people. Find solace in the fact that our ignorance is just as insignificant as the trivial lives we lead. It doesn't matter what we do to the earth. Everything about us is temporary. Take a look at the dioxin pollution on the lower Passaic River. From our perspective, the contamination looks epic and tragic, but in reality, it's nothing that a few billion years can't erase. Humans are unwise and inevitably short-lived. In contrast, the Passaic River is here to stay. Despite the barrels, bottles, and bodies floating through her swamps, we will not destroy the river. Humans are a temporary nuisance, muddying waters that will soon settle in our wake, but the river will continue on whatever course she decides, long after you and I are dead, long after our civilization collapses, long after the last Homo sapien goes extinct. Because polluted or not, all that water has to go somewhere, and the Passaic River is the main line, North Jersey's aorta, pumping life to the land on which we are despicable parasites, a vile infestation covering the earth in a crust like a fungal infection, suppressing all species, tainting all rivers, streams, lakes, ponds, oceans, seas, skies. And what will happen when our warmongering against the earth goes too far? What are all those nuclear missiles for, waiting in silos and subs, ready to perform their duty of mutually assured destruction? When the ICBMs start flying, and the cities burn, and the sun goes dark, and the crops won't grow, and the water is vile, and we expire, along with our families, irradiated, starved, parched, poisoned, dead, maybe we will finally see that everything is connected, but it will be too late. And here's the really bad news. It's already too late. Go down to the river right now. You will find signs of end times. Our pollution floating on the surface can be read like tea leaves and foretells of doom. Stare long enough into the depths, and you will see visions of a panicked human herd running off the cliff face of technology into a nuclear inferno of our own exquisite design, and will take every living creature on this planet straight to hell with us. But the Passaic River will triumph. She will persist. When we damned the river, we damned ourselves, but the Passaic will go, and long live her flow. And that concludes today's reading. Thank you for your time. This is Wheeler Antabanez, signing off.